Martha, could you explain to me, like if I was 5 years old, what is a schema markup?
Sure. I always like to talk about it being a vocabulary to start. So just like we would say when you're using kind of language, if I'm speaking in English or I'm speaking in French or Spanish, this is sort of a vocabulary that was defined by the search engines. So when we talk about schema markup, it's a language, right? So in 2011, Google, Yahoo, and Bing and Yandex came together and defined this vocabulary to describe sort of what content and what pages were about, and with a lot of properties. And so schema markup is really sort of that application of putting that vocabulary on the page to explain what it's about. And what's different about it that I think is something we're really passionate about at Schema App is that it does have sort of semantic elements of it, in that the vocabulary is asking you to define relationships. And the way I sort of explain this often is by introducing myself. So as you know, my name is Martha van Berkel, and I'm the CEO and co-founder here at Schema App. I'm Canadian, so you might hear me say A. I grew up in enterprise, so I grew up working for Cisco Systems, so the big networking company. I spent 14 years there. And I used to own a 1965 Austin Healey Sprite. So if you can imagine, if you know what like an MG looks like, that's what sort of the car looks like. And my actual car was in a movie called Losing Chase that Kevin Bacon directed. And so Kevin Bacon used to drive my car.
Basically, that's it.
Right. So when I introduce myself, I'm like defining these relationships, right? And in fact, when I'm sort of talking to customers or prospects, I have a picture that sort of explains what I call like a knowledge graph. And I'm using schema markup, this language of search engines, to describe those relationships, right? So the relationship to my car, to my previous employer. I also am an engineer, so I sort of describe that I'm an alumnus of sort of those universities. And the key here is when you understand the relationship. So if you have the context, which is what schema markup does, you can actually start doing inferencing. So for example, you were laughing because if you know the game 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon, you know that you can now win because you've met me, because you understand the relationship between me, my car, the movie, and Kevin Bacon. So schema markup is this vocabulary that explains context and defines relationships within content. And so again, if we're thinking in the search engine optimization space, it's like, how are you translating your content, your website, and the things on it to bring context so that search engines and machines can understand it, so that they can do that inferencing, that same inferencing that you did with the Kevin Bacon piece, but they can do that sort of in the context of your business.
I love this. And it could have not been better explained than with a reference to Kevin Bacon. So thanks a lot for this, Martha. Can you introduce us to knowledge graph then? Because I feel there is a link here.
There is. So when you actually start using a standard vocabulary to describe relationships, to do inferencing, at that point, the schema markup is like describing one page in the relationships. But when you put them all together, and actually if you can see the picture behind me, like there's like kind of connection points, right? It's almost like a web of understanding. That's when you have a knowledge graph. And so the knowledge graph is actually created by putting schema markup on each page, describing these relationships. And knowledge graphs are really important because of the inferencing. And actually, there's quite a lot of research right now that large language models and knowledge graphs work, hand in hand. We know that large language models have the problem of, when they're doing inferencing, if it's not grounded, they can have hallucinations. And so knowledge graphs, because they're really foundational in defining those relationships and enabling accurate inferencing, they actually really help. And this makes a lot of sense in the search space, right? So as Bing and ChatGPT and SGE and AI overviews, name the latest sort of AI experience, sort of enabled through search. Yeah, they're basically using the schema markup and therefore your content knowledge graph on your website to make sure they're getting the answers right, to make sure they're inferencing correctly. So that's actually why it's really important, I would say, now more than ever, to be thinking of this strategy as part of your SEO work, because historically people just did schema markup to get a rich result. So the way I explain that to my mom is like, it's like where you see like stars and extra information in the search results that sort of entices you to click. So rich results have been around for a long time. But now schema markup is more than just rich results. It's now about helping the search engines and the machines understand and like do that inferencing, which is different than just a year ago.
I'd like to dig a little bit deeper into this. Why is it particularly relevant now? Is it purely because of AI? And so those new tools will leverage knowledge graph to, like, make certain results come up in their answers to whoever is typing a query? Or is it overall, even for SEO, because, well, Google is here to last, it will also play an important role in the future, so we might as well just look into this now, right? What's the time reference here?
So I think, like, even if we think about just the initial value, which is getting a rich result, which yields higher click-through rates, like that's been around since 2011. So if you're not doing that today, part of me is like, this has been around for a long time. Like you should be doing that, because if you're an SEO, you likely want to see more traffic or, get a higher click-through rate. So to me, it's not new. So that's sort of like, get up to times. The other reason is around AI foundations. So with the nuance and changes going on around the technology that's enabling search, having like the website owner having control on how their content is being understood and what context it's being in is I would say now more important. And and the value is when you do it well, when you explain, do robust schema markup, and I can explain like what robust schema markup is. We are also seeing that move click-through rate higher. And so, whether that be because we're actually making it easier to consume the content or make it easier for the search engines to do that inferencing, no matter what, we're seeing it drive results. And so, again, if you're an SEO who cares about results, then, you should be doing this.
The best moment to do it was 10 years ago, but the second best moment to do it is today.
Now. Yeah, right. Exactly.
Which makes sense. And so why SEO should care about this? It's because this will help Google and therefore the users understand your brand and what you're doing better, so serve better results that will yield better click-through rate. That's the reason why SEO should care about it.
And that's how we measure it. Like we do also typically hear from our clients that they're getting higher quality leads, or higher quality traffic. That's harder to measure unless you're just measuring like higher conversion rate after you have the traffic, right? So we are seeing it yield better business results.
And so what metric do you, because that's super interesting, what metric do you typically look at? It's like for the same period where nothing else changed, this is a bit hard to assess, but okay. The closing rate on certain leads that came on the website was higher than before we took care of schema markup. Is that how you measure this typically?
So the one that we attribute directly is click-through rate. So we look at it in two ways today. So one is if you're achieving a rich result. When you're achieving the rich result, what click-through rate are you getting? How many impressions and clicks are you getting? But is it converting better? And we typically see it converting significantly better than sort of when you don't get the rich result. And those type of reporting is in Google Search Console sort of for specific rich results. The second metric we then look at is like overall click-through rate on the site, because we have seen specifically after we've implemented schema markup, just like advanced schema markup, even if it's not achieving a rich result, we see the click-through rate of the whole site increase. And then the third thing we look at is how are queries converting. And the reason we're looking specifically at queries is in the last year, as you build your schema markup, and I talked about like what is advanced schema markup. So maybe I start there. There's certain tactics you can do that also move the needle for specific topics. So let me first explain, like when I say like robust or advanced or nested schema markup, what do I mean? So when I explained schema markup, I was explaining like you can optimize a page. So most people think about it as like I need to get this data on the page. I need to translate the page into schema markup. So let's say it's a product page and I'm explaining, what the product name is, what the brand is, these are the images, this is the price, these are the ratings, etc. Now, if there's a video on that page, nested schema markup would mean that like the product page, is the subject of a video. So I'm not sort of putting different types of schema markup on one page. I'm saying the page is primarily about a product, and anything about that product, I'm defining the relationships or defining those other things in context of that product because that's the primary page. So that's sort of when I talk about proper schema markup at a page level, that's what I mean. I want to, like, it's about one thing and I'm going to relate everything else to it. If I then look at the site, I want to then sort of connect and build robust markup across the site. So for that product, if it's offered by, the company, which we would call the organization, it's manufactured by that organization. I'm going to actually connect the dots. So you can kind of almost think of that like as a kid, right? We do like connect the dots, like art. I'm connecting the dots that I'm saying the product is manufactured by the organization. And I'm saying the organization, it's defined on the homepage because the schema markup that's defining is on the homepage. Now, it may also be that that product has these accessories, right? So it has like related products. And so I'm going to list the related products and I'm going to say, and those related products are defined on these pages over here. So you can see how I'm now connecting the dots, just as you were imagining kind of my introduction where, I had a relationship with Cisco. I had a relationship with Kevin Bacon. There's something that's related to Schema App. Now in your schema markup where you're defining those pieces. Now, when you do that well, and then you also use external definitions to help define things. So, for example, maybe that company that sells those products has stores. And so I'm going to say like, well, these products are offered at, and then I'm kind of connecting the dots to the page, the store page, right? Now that store might be located in, I'm in Guelph, Ontario, Canada. So let's say it's in Guelph, Ontario, Canada, which is a city outside of Toronto. I'm going to sort of be very specific, or maybe I'll say London, Ontario, just because it's a confusing one. So London, people might think it's London, England, right? Like London, Ontario is much smaller than London, England. So now I can use an external definition from Wikipedia, Wikidata, or Google's Knowledge Graph saying, no, I'm talking about the London in Canada. Like this is not a big city like in England. When we do that extra bit where we're now what we call disambiguating things, again, we're trying to be really specific to the machines, right? We're translating the content to be really explicit so they can better understand it. We're seeing like even those, I'll say like advanced kind of like really clarifying, we're seeing that move the needle in results as well. So when I talk about robust schema markup, I'm not just talking about like putting organization schema markup on everything. I'm being like very specific. Each page is defining, and in SEO today, we talk about these like as entities, right? Like each page is defining a very specific thing. And I want to relate how that thing is related to other things.
So to put this in layman terms, which are the only one I can understand, the idea is to establish and state clearly what the relationship between two entities are so that when a user makes a search on that specific topic, Google or the search engines figure it out, understand exactly what to serve to that user. So it's the most relevant to them, but it also relates perfectly to what the company is actually doing.
Yeah, and that's where I was going to go, Guillaume, was like, it really is about like, if there's things in your business that are important for your customer to understand, you want to be very clear on your website what those things are and how they relate to other things. So if you're, I also run a business, right? So if you're like, these are the most important things. So again, I like e-commerce has some easier examples, but, like these are the key product areas, or maybe you're a large technology company. It's like these products and services, these solutions or verticals are really key. Like you need to explain what those are and how they relate to one another. And especially in complex businesses, like we work with kind of a lot of large enterprise, like it's complicated, right? So, maybe a solution has multiple products that are part of it and are offered to different geographies and, different, locations sell those specific pieces. Those are, like the complexity of what we understand through human language, we now need to be explicit and make really, really clear to sort of these machines, right, that are trying to figure it out.
Who's typically involved in this? Like, I understand that obviously SEO have to take this seriously if they want to get results. So SEOs who don't want to get results, they just can continue as they are. But who else is involved in that? Like, who should be concerned or at least brought up to speed when it comes to schema markup?
So really is a collaborative effort. So first of all, the content on the page has to be there. So you have to have robust content. Google's pretty clear as to sort of what they want to see for different topics. And then the schema.org vocabulary also explains sort of what the machines were looking for in different topics. So it starts by having really robust content. Again, sometimes the content teams don't know what that is. So the SEOs then can explain what that is. Like, hey, here are some of the things that we need. And this is beyond keywords. Sometimes it really is, we work with a lot of healthcare organizations. It could be, the physicians offer these services and practice at these locations. So the physician pages need to explain those things and ideally link to them so that, they can kind of follow those pieces. So the content teams are good. So the SEO is often kind of thinking about the strategy and thinking about like, well, I want to get this done. They can also understand sort of like what the requirements are from an SEO perspective. They then need to partner with the content teams. And then often the content teams will say, well, we want to do this at scale. So we need to involve the IT team or people who sort of own page kind of structure to make sure that it's then sort of the pages has some type of, architecture that allows like delineation of different things. Because again, if you're trying to map these things into a vocabulary, it can't just be a big blob of text. So there's sort of, I'll say, page layout. And then depending on how you implement it, whether you implement it with someone like us at Schema App or your IT team itself is going to do it, or you're going to work with your CMS to get it done, there is a technical team. This is something that, is data that it's like a data layer that needs to show up on the page. So it really is that collaborative effort. And then often to get buy-in and sort of to understand the business case, someone in the digital marketing or marketing area, sort of leadership would be involved because they would want to understand like, well, why is this important to the business? How are we going to measure the impact? Why should we invest in this? And so a lot of that sort of work around, this is how it's going to move the click-through rate is important so that they can engage sort of how much they want to invest in it from a business standpoint.
I have a bit of a curveball for you, Martha. And maybe that's just because I'm not aware enough of this world, right? But I'm a bit like, okay, there must be quite some parties involved, obviously, when it comes to decision making. That's a niche of a niche of a niche problem, right? How do you bring awareness to people to make them understand the importance of Schema Markup? And how do you, let's not be afraid of the words, educate them in a way that they understand that, hey, this can yield real benefits for your business. This is how you can measure it, but this is how you need to act on it. And how do you sell on a project like this?
Yeah, absolutely. So it always starts with like, what is, and I'll say marketing, but it could be like digital marketing. It could be like the website product owner, depending on like, they're going to have specific goals, and the goals typically eventually end up at revenue, right? So we're trying to sell this much more of the deals, or we're trying to drive this many more leads, right? And leads could be appointments, it could be whatever it is.
Hey, if you're still listening to this, you probably find this conversation interesting, and that means that others might too. So the best way you can support this podcast for free is to leave us a 5-star review wherever you're listening to this show. This helps the podcast more than I could say. It means other SEOs can learn and get access to our amazing guests, and that will mean the world to me. All right, with that being said, back to the episode.
And then if you kind of think of the funnel, right? So like the leads are at the bottom, the leads come from visitors on the website. The visitors on the website come from different channels. So it could be you have a paid ads, so like they're going to drive this many this much traffic to the website. And then we have, let's say, organic search. Let's keep it simple, right? And so when you're actually looking to say, well, this is our goal for the year, from a digital marketing standpoint of how many leads we need to get. We know our conversion rate off of the website. How are we going to drive leads to the website? So we know what the paid piece is. And then we know what sort of our impressions, clicks, and click-through rate is from organic search. So when you actually then are like, well, what are the tactics we're going to do in order to drive more traffic to the website? So it could be things such as like, hey, we're just going to put more money into the ad machine, right? We're going to kind of pay there. So again, those kind of numbers are piece. And then the other piece is like, well, what can we do in organic search that's going to help move the needle? And sometimes it's like, oh, well, like our page speed's really bad, so we should really improve that because that will help like the user experience. We're going to invest in new content because we know that our customers are really curious and wanting to understand these pieces. We're going to kind of collaborate with maybe these events or sort of other sort of digital marketing, kind of email people to kind of get our content so that people can then kind of search and find us. Oh, and then like what is it in the SEO space? So Schema Markup would be one of those things where it's like, and especially because we can measure the improvement in click-through rate, like you can tie very specific clicks, to the work that you're doing. That's going to then drive that funnel. So that's like generally how it starts, with regards to kind of tying it back to like the business goal. Now, the other piece that's been really interesting recently is that a lot of executives are being asked, what are we doing to make sure we're future-proofing or prepared for this new AI world? Right? Like literally, it's a fair question. And whether it's like going to be business impacting now, like it's an important question to be asking. Like, where are you investing to make sure that we're ready for this new world? And what's really interesting is there was a report out from Gartner, so research on like 30 enabling technologies that will be critical for making business decisions in this new AI world. And they had a bullseye sort of looking at kind of years. And in the 0 to 1 year, so now, like basically 2024, they had 2 enabling technologies that businesses should be investing in. One is generative AI. So we're not surprised about that, right? Everyone's been kind of thinking about how do they use ChatGPT to do things, right? Whether that be to draft job descriptions or brainstorm ideas. The second enabling technology was knowledge graphs. Really interesting, right? So if you're a marketer and you're like, I need to be, what's this knowledge graph thing and where do I need to be investing? SEOs can raise their hand and say, actually, by doing Schema Markup, we're building a content knowledge graph of our web content that, will allow inferencing. Now we at Schema App, like we're a semantic technology company. We like speak this and do this all day. So like we're working on like, how do content teams ask questions of the content knowledge graph to get insights? The IT team themselves might be like, oh, we need to build a knowledge graph because we're going to need to do more inferencing. So this is, again, another way that SEOs can sell it internally to say, hey, there's hard reasons from the business perspective on results that we're going to drive. And it's an enabling technology that we can invest in easily now that will prepare us for the future. So we're finding that like those two value props together are making it more timely or more important for companies than ever before.
So hold me to the flames here, but when it comes to knowledge graph, you need to, of course, look at how your website is structured and the content that is on your website. But there is also a notion, correct me if I'm wrong, Martha, of what other websites say of you. Not necessarily the links, but just like how your company is represented, what they talk about when they like include your company in their content or your brand or whatever it is. Not only with links, right? But even in a text, like, hey, Schema App, do this, and that, and they help company do this. Then the algorithm of Google and so will look at this context to be able to establish a link between a company name and their activities. First of all, am I correct in this understanding? Or?
Yeah, so there's like knowledge panel and kind of brand awareness, that plays into it. But I would say like a lot of it is, that's sort of more reputation management than it is. And does it like influence authority? Yes. However, I would say like they're also going to look at like what is the actual content you're talking about? Like, do you have, when they're asking me specifically, does Schema App have authority around Schema Markup or knowledge graphs? They're going to look at like, do people refer to us, but they're also going to look at like, do I have robust content that doesn't just mention those words, but really talks about those other things related to those topics that will make sure that I'm like considered an authority on it. So yes, I think there's more kind of brand awareness and so forth, but a lot of it I think also comes down, it's like more nuanced than that, than just mentions these days, because of, the robustness and the ability to understand the content and the things that you're speaking about.
Yeah, that makes sense. So another question on that. What user intent do you target on exactly when it comes to Schema Markup? Or do you at all? Because if you want to optimize for click-through rate, you also need to make sure that you propose the right content at the right time. And that depends on users' intent. So how do you fit this into how you optimize your Schema Markup?
Yeah, so I always think that this comes down to like even just like the basics around your content, right? So the Schema Markup is going to explain what your content's about. So again, your content needs to be kind of robust with regards to like what is the user looking for? What are they trying to understand? Are you talking about, and when we think about an entity or like a topic, what are the related things that talk about it? So if I only speak very shallowly about schema markup, I just mentioned schema markup, but I don't then talk about properties and intent and entities and, all the other things that go along with it, there's sort of like not going to be understanding of that. So I wouldn't say like user intent. You still have to look at like, what are the topics that your user is trying to understand? What are the things that today you're talking about in relationship to that topic? And some of this comes out in query data today, like, what are the types of queries that Google and others are sort of sending your way, and what are they looking for that then allow you to look at sort of an overall topic map. And this is actually some work we're doing right now, because in your schema markup, you can talk about what it's mentioning, right? And you can use natural language processing to identify what are these different topics within an article, right? So let's say it's the podcast we're recording. So you're going to be something that's mentioned. My name is going to be something that's mentioned. My organization is going to be something that's mentioned. We're going to talk about schema markup. We're going to talk about knowledge graph. We're going to talk about, SEO and content and IT. So when you think about all of this, and then you think about like, how are all these things related, right? So like, well, as people, like, well, we're just people in the SEO industry, right? So that might be like how we relate there. But, when we talk about what's like, well, Martha keeps talking about all these things related to, knowledge graph and schema markup, semantic technology, right? So it's going to sort of like have almost like a bubble of like, oh, this is the pieces. So if someone's looking for a podcast where they're talking about semantic technology and SEO, it can then kind of connect the dots around it. Now, if you think about a website if you can understand all the topics and entities that they're talking about, you can then start seeing like, well, what is the website actually an authority on? Right? Because you can kind of see these clusters of topics and things that they come up with. So then if you think about user intent, the user's asking questions. Questions are made out of entities, of things I want to know about. And then Google can then look across the board and say, oh, actually, like there's a big cluster of information over here on these related pieces. Let's go there. So, understanding how your website is talking about those things to then gauge how is the question being asked, what are the entities or topics within that question. To me, that's how we should be thinking about it from a kind of SEO and content perspective. And so we're working on the ability to ask your knowledge graph those questions so that you have a better sense of, if I want to be asking people who have an intent to buy a schema markup solution that scales for enterprise, right, which is what we do, am I talking about all the right things that make sure that they know that that's what we do?
That makes 100% sense.
Yeah. So it's like more than intent and more about like, think about how the question's being asked, what are the things they need to know about, and how is your content related to that? And a lot of this just comes down to like, what are real people asking questions on? Like, are you answering your customers' questions in your content? Are you talking about the things that real people want to know about? I think, helpful content updates from Google over the last year is really like write really good, robust content that people want to read.
And so how do you get started? Let's say I want to be the SEO hero of the year. How do I get started on schema markup, Martha?
I think the first thing to understand is to make sure you understand what is schema markup and so forth. So we actually have free training that people are welcome. It's at training.schemaapp.com. So we have a schema markup 101. We actually have a content knowledge graph course. So if you're like, oh, I want to understand this like more advanced piece, so kind of get educated, I would say is start. I know there's also other training out there available, but the thing is like to make sure you understand the basics. The second thing I would then do is like have a sense of like, how are you doing today? So whether that be using schema.org has a validator that allows you to kind of put in a web page and see if there's schema markup on it. There's also the rich result testing tool that will tell you like, do you have any schema markup? So there's articles on our website that help explain what that is, but kind of have a sense of, are you doing anything today? And then the next question I would ask is like, is what you're doing being effective? So again, you can look at how to measure the impact of schema markup. We have an article on Schema App for that. Can you actually go into Search Console? Like, are you seeing rich results? How has your click-through rate been changing over time? And then at that point, then it's a question of like, what's important for the business? So I always go back to, what does your boss's boss care about? Like moving the needle. And then, if you're not doing it today, or if you're not doing it well today, then sort of asking the question of like, would this move the needle based on the business results that you're trying to achieve?
That sounds great, Martha. And I want to look at my schema markup right now for my 2 websites. But give me the second edge of the sword. What are typical challenges when it comes to schema markup? Okay, give me the top two challenges.
So the top 2 is it's complicated, right? So even if you understand how to do it in like a connected way, and then getting, again, depending on your size of your site, like optimizing a site that has like 5 or 10 core pages and then maybe a blog, like that's not hard to do because there's just like not that many types of content. But doing it at scale where it's maintained in a way that is actually going to drive results is complicated, because often the people in IT or the technical people you're going to partner with to do it don't understand JSON LD. They might understand JSON or they might understand JavaScript, but they don't understand the connectedness, the semanticness of it and how it goes. So that's typically where people get stuck, is that they kind of really want to get it done. They're trying to figure out how to use the vocabulary and get it done. So that's where the expertise, that's where our training is trying to help. And then how do you actually get it implemented in a way that will be maintained? And I say maintained because like content changes, right? And page structures change, especially if you're in an enterprise. But this is, again, like why we created Schema App and sort of the problems that we solve.
So I love that you bring this up. So first question from this. Not like that I have only 2 questions, but first one that comes from this. How long does it take to typically get results? When you start looking at your schema markup, when you start implementing changes, how long does it take to see your click-through rates go up?
So we see like initial visibility of the markup like within 30 to 45 days after it's been implemented. And then within the first quarter, like you should see like that first movement. So within those first 90 days. And then again, if like you're iterating on it, you're iterating on your content so that you can then update your schema markup. You're then looking for some of these more advanced features like what we call linked entities. You can keep kind of moving the needle, right? So we always ask the question is like, after you've done it first, like, well, which rich results do you want to achieve that you're not achieving today? And what content do you need in order to achieve that? So go through that iteration. And then, what are some more advanced things that you can do within the markup that doesn't require content changes, but that, the market is seeing sort of move the needle. And so that's why like it's an iterative thing. It's not a set and forget piece. It's something that does need to be managed. And again, where that collaboration needs to exist between content, SEO, and then again, a solution provider or someone like IT, so that like it's constantly sort of iterating and being managed so that you can keep getting results.
That makes a lot of sense. And that makes me think of that second question, which is, how do you make sure that the IT team or the content team or the marketing team, whatever, is not doing something 3 months down the line that messes up with your schema markup?
So the lagging indicators, you're going to see it show up in your Google Search Console. Sort of if like there's, again, for rich results, you might see your valid instances decrease. At Schema App, we actually monitor it. So we monitor sort of like if we see dropping properties or if we see like an integration drop, so that we can kind of ask the question, what happened and why is this changing, and get on it quickly. Because if you're thinking of, again, the business results, like you want to be managing that. There are tools like people use like SEMrush and Screaming Frog. There are other tools that will tell you sort of like, what exists on the page. And so there might be ways that you could use those perhaps to monitor sort of how things are changing. But typically it's a lagging indicator where you see things change or drop and then you have to react to it.
So once you work on your schema markup, you get your click-through rates higher. Is there any link whatsoever with the authority of your website? Like, are you going to look for building the authority at the same time? Because you're now, the way I see this, Martha, sorry if it's a bit deconstructed, but the way I see this is that you want to make sure that your base is rock solid. Meaning whenever somebody is going to look for a term or like a specific thing, they're going to find your company because it's super relevant. Once you have that base with a high click-through rate, you want to put as many people as possible at the top of the funnel, right? So is there a world where you establish that base, but then you're like, hey, now that we have like tripled or quadrupled the click-through rate, now it's time to pull more people in which case ranking higher even?
Well, I think it's just like one of those things like schema markup is not the silver bullet. Like it works hand in hand with doing all the foundational work. So if your site is really slow, like it's going to move the needle a little bit, but probably not as much. So you need to so all those foundational metrics. And I think like when you're saying like, hey, your click-through rate's going higher, how do you get more people in the funnel? That's where like that bigger marketing strategy comes into play too, right? So, how are you going to get more visibility? How are you going to drive authority? This is one strategy in your sort of toolkit of digital marketing in order to get those things done, right? It just happens to be really effective sort of, at moving the needle, specifically in organic search.
Cool. That makes sense. So I like how you put this into the context of, hey, you need to make sure that all the compartments of your SEO optimization are also
moving forward. Absolutely. Like you can't just do this and be like, hey, I'm done.
All fixed. I'm the SEO hero.
Exactly. I think, where SEO has a chance to really be the hero is in the fact, when I was talking about Gartner and sort of like this is building a data layer that makes, organizations be able to kind of be understood by machines or AI and likely be reused in different ways that we don't even know in the future. And so I think like if we put on our kind of CMO hat or sort of like, our senior leader hat, like this isn't just something that will move the needle in the SEO's world. It's also fun and interesting and an area to learn, but it could be very strategic for the business. And that's where I think, there's lots of wins that go on right now because of the market we're sitting in, because of sort of executive focus on innovation and AI and sort of I'll say fear associated with how that's being disruptive. I think there's a really critical time that SEOs can use now to say, hey, I have something that can help.
I might be able to save the day. What's the number one mistake that SEO makes when it comes to schema markup?
They optimize page by page and they don't think about the site and the knowledge graph. They think of it as a tactic. Absolutely.
So it's funny because it would be, hey, implementation might be right. Strategy-wise, they have not looked at the big picture.
Yeah. Well, and I would say implementation was right in 2020, but it's 2024. And now like the contextual relationships are important because of how technology is advanced.
And that's funny because it's not only Google, right? It's all the tools.
Yeah, and we think about, I often say like this is a way that you control sort of how you're being understood by these AI search engines. So historically where we were just like, hey, we just want search engines to crawl our site so it kind of, we have a chance of ranking. Now it's like, how am I being purposeful about who's consuming it and how they're consuming it, especially in large enterprise, where there's conversation of like, you're giving your data, right? Like your data is being given to these machines in order to get pulled. How do we, make sure that they're really understanding in the way that you want to do it so that you think about brand awareness or brand control, like you can use the schema markup to make sure it's understood in the way that you want it understood.
That makes a lot of sense. How come you know that much? And what do you do exactly when it comes to schema markup?
Sure. Well, I know all of this because in 2016, we started a company called Schema App, which is all about schema markup, doing it at scale and doing it in a semantic technology way. And like we've been building knowledge graphs for companies, even when people didn't care about knowledge graphs. Because before it was cool, yeah. So my co-founder is a semantic technology, an architect, and my team here at Schema App are semantic ontologists. So this is sort of what we do, and we specialize in this area of search. So we have a technology platform that does schema markup at scale that solves all those problems around maintenance, IT integration, and then we have a customer success team that coaches content teams and SEOs on how to make sure they're really maximizing the return from doing schema markup. And we love partnering with mid to large enterprise in order to do that. And we have a ton of content. So we are on a mission to educate the whole world about how to do this properly. So go to www.schemaapp.com. That's where our training resources are. So there's a resources area. We have a blog where we talk a lot about the value proposition, about sort of case studies around how people in different industries are getting value from it. So if you're looking to kind of pitch this and need resources. And then there's also our free training. So training.schemaapp.com, sign up, learn about it. And then if you want to know about sort of what's going on in industry, we also have a newsletter you can sign up to that we sort of send out monthly that like, this is what we're reading. This is what we're learning. Again, if you're really passionate about this area, like we are, that's where you can find us.
And we'll put all the links in the description. Martha, thank you so much for coming on SEO Guru.
Thank you very much for having me.
Hey, thank you so much for making it to the end. For more content updates, visit our website at ghapodcast.com, and don't forget to connect with me on LinkedIn for more tips and insights on SEO. See you in the next episode.